You're standing in your prayer. You're trying to focus. And then a thought comes into your head. A thought that horrifies you. A thought you would never choose to think. A thought that makes you question whether there's something deeply wrong with you. Maybe it was a blasphemous thought. Maybe it questions something you believe. Maybe it was something violent or shameful that you'd never act on. Now the prayer's over, and you don't know whether it counted. You don't know if you sinned. You don't know if these thoughts mean you're not a real Muslim, or that your faith is broken, or that something's wrong with you that other Muslims don't experience. I want to talk about this today because I think this is one of the most common silent struggles young Muslims carry, and almost nobody addresses it directly. Islam has a complete explanation for what these thoughts are, where they come from, and why their presence doesn't reflect your faith, your character, or your relationship with Allah. If this kind of content is useful to you, subscribe now. It genuinely helps me keep making it, and you won't miss what's coming next. There are experiences that many Muslims carry completely alone. I'm talking about intrusive thoughts during salah. Thoughts that feel shocking or even blasphemous, right? Constant doubts about whether your wudu is valid, right? Repeating prayers because they didn't feel right. Or disturbing thoughts about harming others, committing sins, or thinking about things you'd never actually want to do. And what makes this so painful is not just the thoughts themselves. It's the shame that comes with them. Many people feel like they can't tell anyone. Not their parents, not their imam, not their friends, because they worry, does this mean I'm a bad Muslim? Right? Does this mean there's something seriously wrong with me? Does this make me a hypocrite? And for some people, the distress becomes so intense that they start avoiding worship altogether. They shorten their prayers. They delay them, or they stop praying as consistently because salah has become associated with fear and mental exhaustion. Now, if that's something you've experienced, it's important to know you are far from alone. And the real question is, what does Islam actually say about this? So Islam has a specific term for this experience, and it's called Waswasa, right? The whispering. The word itself appears in the Quran, in the last surah, An-Nas. We seek refuge from Al-Waswas Al-Khannas, right? The whisperer who retreats. Now our scholars explain that Waswasa is the specific tool Shaytan uses to disturb the believer during worship and in moments of closeness to Allah. Not to make them sin directly, but to make them doubt, distress, and withdraw from the very acts of worship that strengthen their connection to Allah. And the Prophet ﷺ specifically addressed what to do when these thoughts arrive. He said, Allah has forgiven my ummah for what occurs in their hearts, as long as they do not act upon it or speak of it. He ﷺ also said, when any of you feels something in their prayer and is not sure whether they passed wind or not, don't leave the prayer unless you hear a sound or smell something, right? Don't let the shaitan remove you from your worship through doubt. The thought arriving is not the sin. The thought being rejected is iman. And that's the Islamic position stated explicitly. One of the most important things to understand about waswasa is this. It often targets the people who care the most. The scholars observed that these intrusive thoughts tend to affect those who are sincere in their worship. I mean, think about it. A person who doesn't care about their salah isn't usually distressed by doubts during it. They're not worried whether their wudu was valid. They're not repeating their prayer because they fear they did something wrong, right? The distress itself is evidence this matters deeply to you. And that changes the meaning of what you're experiencing. It's not proof that your faith is weak. In many cases, it's proof that your faith is precious to you. And scholars like Ibn al-Qayyim described waswasa as a targeted attack on the heart that is moving toward Allah. The closer a heart gets to Allah, the more intensely shaitan may try to distract, discourage, and exhaust it. That's why new Muslims and people who are returning seriously to their deen often experience this most strongly. It's not because they're failing, but because they're advancing. There's also an important clinical dimension here. Many Muslim scholars and Muslim psychologists recognize that some forms of waswasa overlap with what psychology calls scrupulosity or religious OCD. And what's striking is that the Islamic response and the clinical response are remarkably similar. And that is, do not engage with the thought. Do not keep seeking reassurance. Do not repeat the act over and over. Dismiss the doubt and continue. So whether the source is described spiritually, psychologically, or both, the core principle remains the same. The thought itself is not the problem. The trap is getting pulled into it. And freedom begins when you stop treating every intrusive thought as something that deserves your attention. But knowing intellectually that the thought is waswasa doesn't always make it feel better in the moment, right? Especially for someone who's been experiencing this for months or years. So let me talk about what the Islamic tradition specifically says to do when waswasa arrives. Because there is a method. And it's the opposite of what most people instinctively do. The scholarly guidance on waswasa can be summarized in one central rule, right? And I'm going to say this again. Do not engage with the thought. And that word, engage, covers a lot. It includes arguing with the thought, analyzing it, trying to prove to yourself that it isn't true, seeking reassurance from others, right? Or even repeating the wudu or the salah to feel certain, right? Every time you do that, you send a message to your mind that this thought is important, that it deserves attention. And that's exactly what makes it stronger. The prophetic response is remarkably simple. The Prophet ﷺ instructed a person to lightly spit to the left 3 times and say, "A'udhu billahi minash shaytanir rajim," right? I seek refuge in Allah from Shaytan the accursed. This is not superstition. It's a physical and verbal act of dismissal, right? You don't debate with a thought. You don't analyze its content. You acknowledge it and move on. The scholars are also very explicit about a practical principle. Do not repeat your wudu or your salah unless there's objective evidence that something was invalid, right? Not a feeling, not uncertainty, not it didn't feel right. Actual evidence. If you were in a valid state of wudu before prayer, then you remained in a valid state of wudu until something definite occurred to break it, right? And we all know this. Thoughts do not break wudu, right? Feelings do not break wudu. Doubts do not break wudu. And finally, learn the actual rules. Okay, many people suffering from waswasa are operating with vague uncertainty, right? They're not sure what truly invalidates worship. And uncertainty creates space for doubt to grow, while clear knowledge closes that space. So the scholarly method is straightforward, right? Know the rules, ignore the doubts, don't repeat the act, and just continue your worship. Now, there is a paradox at the heart of waswasa. The more you fight the thought, the stronger it becomes. The more you analyze it, argue with it, try to prove it wrong, or seek certainty about it, the more attention and energy you give it. And that's exactly what keeps it alive, which is why the Islamic response is so profound. You don't wrestle with the thought. You dismiss it without engaging. You notice it and continue. Interestingly, this is almost identical to what modern cognitive behavioral therapy teaches for intrusive thoughts. The thought's acknowledged, but not given meaning. Not treated as significant. Not interpreted as a reflection of who you are. And that leads to one of the most important truths to understand, right? If a blasphemous thought causes you distress, that distress is itself evidence that you don't believe it. A person who genuinely held that belief wouldn't be horrified by it. They would agree with it. The thought is the waswasa. The distress is your iman. It's your heart rejecting what entered your mind. And that distinction is crucial because many sincere Muslims mistake the presence of the thought for consent to the thought, but they aren't the same. A thought can appear in your mind without representing you at all. And finally, there's an important pastoral point, okay? For some people, this goes far beyond occasional whisperings. It becomes genuinely debilitating. Hours consumed by doubts, repeating wudu, repeated prayers, severe anxiety, right? Avoidance of worship altogether. When that happens, seeking help from a therapist, ideally one who understands both the Islamic and clinical dimensions, is not a sign of weak faith. It's wisdom, because Islam doesn't ask you to suffer in silence. It teaches you to take the means, right, the asbab, and trust Allah with the outcome, tawakkul. So what do you actually do when waswasa shows up? First, when an intrusive thought appears during salah, simply acknowledge that it happened, right? Don't analyze it, don't argue with it, and don't panic. Quietly say, "A'udhu billahi minash shaytanir rajim," and then return your attention to the prayer. And unless something objectively happened to invalidate the salah, don't restart it. Second, when a doubt arises about your wudu, apply the foundational rule. Certainty is not removed by doubt. Okay? If you performed wudu and you have no clear evidence that it was broken, then you are still in a state of wudu. Okay? The feeling of uncertainty is an evidence. So don't repeat it. Third, if a disturbing thought continues to bother you after the prayer, remember this. The thought appearing isn't a sin. What matters is that you rejected it. You don't need to confess it. You don't need to repeatedly ask an imam for reassurance. Okay? And you don't need to repeat the prayer. Because reassurance seeking may feel helpful in the moment, but it often just strengthens the cycle. And finally, build a regular protective practice. Read the last 3 surahs of the Quran, Surah Al-Ikhlas, Surah Al-Falaq, and Surah Al-Nas, and blow over yourself before sleeping. This was a consistent sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, a simple daily act of spiritual protection. So the practical approach is straightforward. Again, notice the thought, seek refuge in Allah, don't repeat the act, and just keep moving forward. Because the goal isn't to eliminate every intrusive thought. That's not going to happen. The goal is to stop giving them control. Now, the key thing to understand is this. The thought is not yours. Its arrival wasn't chosen by you, and it doesn't reflect you. What you do with it is where your character appears, and you have been rejecting it. Every single time. That rejection isn't nothing. That rejection is the believer's heart doing exactly what it should do. It's Iman working, so you're not broken. Your prayer isn't invalid. Your relationship with Allah isn't compromised by thoughts you didn't choose and don't believe anyway. The whisperer retreats. Okay? Keep praying. Now, if this gave you something you've needed to hear for a long time, subscribe. And share this with a Muslim who you know has been silently struggling with this. They may never have told you, but this might be the video that finally helps them understand what's been happening.